Most marriages become silent prisons because they are built upon the illusion of connection, not the reality of it. They are forged in the fires of expectation, not the crucible of understanding. They are sustained by the inertia of routine, not the vitality of shared growth. In these unions, partners become strangers, bound not by love but by obligation, not by intimacy but by proximity. The silence that pervades these relationships is not peaceful. It is deafening, a testament to the emotional chasm that has widened over time. It is in this silence that the true nature of the prison is revealed, not one of bars and walls, but of unmet needs, unspoken words, and unrealized selves. Because at the altar we promise forever, but rarely do we promise truth. And truth, unvarnished and raw, is the only foundation love can survive on. Not the sugar-coated confessions, not the performative affection posted on social media, not the stale rituals repeated year after year like a lifeless script, but truth, the kind that breaks illusions before it breaks your spirit. The truth that most people never speak, because they don't even whisper it to themselves. That they married not a person, but a projection, an echo of their unmet childhood longings, stitched together with hope and denial. And over time, the projection fades, the mask falls, the fairy tale rots, and what's left standing across from you at the dinner table is not your soulmate. It's a mirror. A living, breathing mirror showing you everything you were too afraid to face within yourself. This is why the kitchen grows quieter, why sex becomes negotiation, why laughter feels forced and small talk replaces soul talk. Because when you spend a decade avoiding the truth, intimacy dies. Not suddenly, but by suffocation. 1,000 unsaid sentences. 1,000 moments you swallowed your truth to keep the peace. 1,000 nights lying next to someone, feeling lonelier than you did when you were alone. This isn't marriage. This is a mausoleum of who you used to be. And yet, you smile for the family photos. You hold hands in public. You play the game, wearing the mask, while a part of you withers in silence, wondering if this is the price of love or the cost of self-betrayal. Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And marriage, more than any other institution, becomes the stage where this absurdity unfolds. It's where two unexamined lives collide, not to liberate each other, but to trap each other in a shared dream of safety where truth becomes too dangerous to speak aloud. Because truth shatters illusions. And illusions are all that many marriages have left. You see, most people don't want to be loved. They want to be worshipped, admired, coddled, protected from the mirror. They don't want a partner. They want an accomplice in their avoidance. But the soul, it starves in such arrangements. It craves confrontation. It demands authenticity. It seeks out relationships that strip you bare, not dress you up. But society never taught us this. It taught us to seek compatibility, not depth, stability, not transformation. And so we marry our comfort zone, then spend the next 20 years resenting it. Not because the partner changed, but because we never allowed ourselves to. We chose the illusion of safety over the risk of self-actualization. We chose tradition over evolution. We chose silence over truth. But silence is not peace. It's the slow decay of your voice, your needs, your truth, until you no longer recognize yourself, even in the presence of someone who once made your heart race. This is the silent prison, not built by abuse, but by avoidance. Not enforced by force, but by fear. The fear of what would happen if you finally spoke the truth. I'm not happy, I'm not seen, I'm not alive in this. That sentence alone has the power to liberate or destroy. And most people would rather rot than risk it, because we've mistaken longevity for success. But a 30-year sentence is still a sentence even if you both smile in front of the kids. And so the marriage becomes a museum of old photos and broken dreams. The home becomes a mausoleum of who you were before you stopped trying. And love becomes a memory, not a presence. But here's the awakening. Your soul was never designed for such quiet desperation. It was meant to burn, to speak, to shatter false selves and demand depth, even if that depth comes at the cost of comfort. Because the only real marriage is the one where both people are free, free to grow, free to speak, free to change, even if that change terrifies the other. Without that freedom, you are not in a marriage, you are in a performance. A lifelong audition for someone else's approval instead of a sacred rebellion toward your own becoming. And the question is, how long will you keep playing the role? How long will you betray yourself in the name of keeping something whole that is already broken? And how long will you pretend that silence is love when deep down you know it's the graveyard of it? You want to know why most marriages become silent prisons? Because most people were never taught to love. They were only taught to attach, to cling, to bind themselves to the nearest warm body and call it destiny. But love isn't possession. It isn't tradition. It isn't the white dress or the mortgage or the Sunday dinners. Love is evolution. And evolution demands risk. It demands death, the death of the false self, the death of fantasy, the death of control. Only then can two souls meet not as prisoners of their past, but as warriors of their truth. And until you are ready for that death, marriage will always feel like a cage. Even if the world calls it success, even if your friends are jealous, even if you've got the perfect photos on the wall, because deep down, your soul knows the truth. It always has. And it will keep whispering louder and louder until you either answer the call or bury it beneath another decade of silence. The time is now. Burn the mask. Because the only prison you ever lived in was your refusal to face the truth. And the truth is brutal. It's not poetic, it's not romantic, it doesn't come with violins in the background or candlelit epiphanies. It comes in moments of stillness when the kids are asleep, the dishes are done, and there's nothing left to distract you from the void sitting beside you on the couch. That's when it hits. The eerie feeling that you're living with someone you once knew, and now only manage. You manage their moods, their silence, their outbursts, their absence. You manage their presence like a project, not a person. You walk on eggshells, not because they're dangerous, but because the illusion you've built is so fragile that one honest conversation could reduce it to rubble. And so you avoid, you defer, you silence your own voice to maintain the comfort of the lie. But there's no peace in that comfort. Only a low-grade existential ache, the kind you can't explain to anyone without sounding ungrateful. Because how do you tell the world I'm drowning when they only see the surface? The smiles, the vacations, the anniversaries. You don't. You just keep drowning quietly, hoping your partner will notice, or at least that the numbness will protect you from caring. But you care. You care so deeply it hurts. And that hurt has nowhere to go. So it calcifies into bitterness, into sarcasm, into passive-aggressive jabs during dinner, into long silences filled with everything you're too afraid to say, until your love language becomes avoidance, until your connection becomes logistics, until your intimacy becomes a ghost that visits once a year only to remind you of what you've lost. This is not love. This is a slow spiritual erosion. And yet, we justify it. We say, every marriage has its ups and downs. We say, it's just a phase. We say, at least we're not like them. But comparison is not salvation. It's just a more palatable version of denial. Because deep down, you know, this is not a phase, it's a pattern. It's been repeating for years. You've adapted, You've lowered your standards. You've rewritten the definition of love to fit your reality. But love was never meant to be redefined. It was meant to be rediscovered. Rediscovered in truth, in growth, in courage, in confronting the parts of yourself you've hidden to keep someone else comfortable. Because love doesn't grow in silence. It grows in the fire of vulnerability, in saying, this is who I really am. Can you still meet me here? But few have the strength for that, because that kind of love doesn't guarantee comfort. It guarantees transformation. And transformation is terrifying when you've built your identity around someone else's approval. But the truth is, until you confront your fear of losing them, you will never truly find yourself. And that's the paradox of marriage. The more you cling, the more it slips. The more you fear the truth, the more it rots. The more you pretend, the more it dies. You don't need a new partner. You need a new relationship with yourself. Because the version of you who accepted this silent prison is not the highest version of you. It's the version trained by fear, trained to compromise before expressing, to please before feeling, to endure before confronting. That version of you needs to die. Not because it was wrong, but because it was surviving, not living, and your soul is tired of surviving. It wants to speak, to scream, to stretch out of the box it was placed in by culture, tradition, and childhood wounds. It wants to be seen not for what it provides, but for what it is. And here's the reckoning. If your marriage cannot hold that truth, then it was never a sacred bond. It was a silent contract written in fear, signed in need, maintained in shame. Real love says, change, grow, evolve. Even if it terrifies me, even if it leaves me behind, I'd rather see your soul than keep you caged. That is the love worth bleeding for. But that love is rare, because most people don't want your truth. They want your compliance. And so we shrink, we wear the mask, we smile through the pain, until one day the mask becomes our face. And we forget who we were before the world told us what marriage was supposed to be. But the soul remembers. It remembers the wildness, the depth, the rage, the poetry. It remembers the version of you who wanted more than safety, the version who burned for meaning, for rawness, for sacred connection. And the soul will not stop whispering until you return, even if it means burning down everything that kept you silent, even if it means becoming the villain in someone else's story, even if it means walking alone for a while, not because you don't deserve love, but because you finally do. Because the love that lets you abandon yourself is not love. It's bondage dressed in vows. And freedom, real freedom, begins the moment you say, no more silence, no more pretending, no more performance. If I have to burn this mask to remember who I am, so be it. That's not rebellion. That's resurrection. That's the death of the quiet prisoner and the return of the sovereign soul. And that soul, your soul, was never meant to live in a silent prison. It was meant to roar. It was meant to rage against the walls of domesticated despair. Because what you call marriage today is often not union. It is sedation, a tranquilized version of life where love is managed like a calendar appointment and desire is negotiated like a ceasefire, where the ritual of togetherness becomes a routine of avoidance. You ask why marriages fall into silence? Because silence is safe when words might ignite a fire you can no longer contain. Because it's easier to become roommates with shared responsibilities and two souls dancing naked in emotional truth. Because somewhere along the line you traded your fire for predictability. You traded honesty for harmony. You traded your becoming for belonging. And the world applauded you for it. It said, look at them, still together, as if survival is synonymous with sacredness. But survival is not sacred. It is instinct. It is default. It is what happens when you bury your truth beneath years of compromise, until it forms a mountain of resentment too heavy to move. And now, you call that mountain marriage. But it's not. It's mourning. A slow mourning of who you were before you learned to accept a half-lived life. The tragedy is not divorce. The tragedy is staying. Staying when you've outgrown the story. Staying when your truth has become too dangerous to voice. Staying when the cost of pretending has begun to outweigh the comfort of staying silent. Because marriage without evolution is incarceration. And yet we cling, not because we are committed to love, but because we are addicted to the identity that comes with it. We stay for the label, for the illusion of being chosen, for the fear of being alone. But being alone is not the worst fate. Being unseen while lying next to someone every night, that is the real abyss. That is where souls go to die quietly, to calcify into bitterness, to perform happiness for others while grieving themselves in private. And yet, the soul whispers still. It whispers in the late night scrolls, in the hollow arguments, in the fantasies of escape you never tell anyone about. It whispers, this is not who you are. It doesn't whisper divorce, it whispers truth. Because truth doesn't always mean separation. Sometimes it means resurrection. But only if both are willing to unearth the lies. Only if both are willing to die to who they've been pretending to be. Only if both are courageous enough to face the fire of authenticity and say, I don't know how we got here, but I don't want to stay here. That one sentence can save a marriage. Not by preserving the illusion, but by burning it to the ground so something real can rise from the ashes. But most are too afraid. Afraid of the grief, afraid of the guilt, afraid of what others will think. So they stay in the silent prison, decorating the cell with family portraits and annual vacations, mistaking motion for meaning. But inside, the soul knows there is no intimacy without risk, no love without truth, no future without fire. And you were born of fire. You were never meant to adapt to numbness. You were never meant to die quietly inside a performance someone else wrote for you. You are the storm. You are the flame. You are the unspoken sentence that could change everything if only you let it breathe. So speak. Speak the truth you've buried beneath years of pretending. Speak the desire you've muted to keep the peace. Speak the rage, the grief, the hunger. Speak it all. Not to destroy, but to resurrect. Because some things must die for love to be reborn. And if your marriage cannot hold that truth, then it is not worthy of the word. Let them call you selfish. Let them call you crazy. Let them call you whatever makes them comfortable. But don't let them call you silent. Not anymore. Because the silence you've been living in is not peace, it's self-abandonment. And the time has come to choose your voice over their comfort. To choose your soul over their expectations. To choose truth, even if it costs you everything that was built on a lie. Because that is the path of the awakened. The path of the sovereign. The path of the one who refuses to spend another year dying inside a dream that became a cage. Burn it. Not in hatred, but in reverence. Not in bitterness, but in awakening. Burn the mask. Burn the script. Burn the house of mirrors where you lost yourself. And from those ashes, let the real union begin. Not with someone else, but with yourself. Because only when you marry your truth can love finally become liberation. And liberation does not arrive with applause. It arrives with silence, the real kind, not the suffocating silence of repression, but the sacred stillness after the storm. The kind of silence where you finally hear your own heartbeat again, where you meet your reflection without flinching, where the air tastes different, because for the first time in years, it is free of the poison of pretense. You thought the danger was in the confrontation. But the real danger was in the continuation of the lie, of the compromise, of the soul-shrinking rituals you called routine. You were never afraid of losing them. You were afraid of finding yourself, because that would mean undoing everything that once made you feel safe. But what you called safety was a sedative, a pacifier for your deeper knowing. And now the knowing is louder than ever. You can't go back, not because they changed, not because you hate them, but because the version of you that entered that marriage no longer exists. And that's the part no one warns you about. That real growth means you will outgrow the life you built in your sleep. You will wake up one day and realize that you've surrounded yourself with things that fit the mask, not the soul. You realize that the vows you made were not to a person, but to an identity, and now that identity is disintegrating. You're not leaving a marriage. You're leaving a mirage. You're walking away from the roles you rehearsed so well that they became muscle memory. But muscle memory isn't love. It's just repetition. And love, real love, is not repetition. It's revelation. It's when two people stand naked in their evolution and say, I see you now, not who you were, not who I wanted you to be, but who you are and who you're becoming. And if your marriage cannot hold that seeing, then it is not a sanctuary, it's a stage. And you were cast in it long ago as the loyal spouse, the agreeable partner, the perfect parent. But your soul doesn't want a role. It wants a revolution. And revolutions are messy. They cost you comfort. They cost you reputation. They cost you every illusion you built to survive. But what they give you is yourself. Not the self who nods and smiles and serves others at the expense of her own aliveness. Not the self who hides behind I'm fine while bleeding inside. Not the self who translates their rage into politeness, their pain into productivity, their needs into negotiations. But the self who says, I'm done. Done performing, done appeasing, done pretending. Because silence has a cost. And the cost is your soul. And no relationship, no vow, no social expectation is worth that. So yes, let them be shocked. Let them be confused. Let them call it a midlife crisis, a phase, a betrayal. Let them say whatever they need to say to make sense of your awakening. But you don't owe them an explanation. You owe yourself your freedom. And that freedom begins with one sentence. This is no longer my truth. Say it, not for the drama, not for the exit, but for the return to yourself. Because the marriage you were promised was never supposed to be a sentence. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. And if it has become anything else, then it is not love you're protecting, it's fear. And fear is not a foundation. Fear is a cage. But cages don't hold souls forever, not yours. Because your soul remembers. It remembers the younger you, the wilder you, the dreamer, the rebel, the fierce, untamed essence that once burned before the world taught you to dim. That self is not gone. It's buried beneath years of pleasing, surviving, performing. But it's not dead. It's waiting for the crack, for the slip, for the moment when the mask breaks just wide enough for the truth to leak through. And here it is. This moment, right now, the moment you decide not just to see the prison, but to leave it. Not with bitterness, not with blame, but with a sacred rage that says, I will not die here, because life is not meant to be endured. It is meant to be devoured with fire in your lungs and blood in your voice. And you were born for more than silence. You were born to burn through the lies, the roles, the conditioning, the chains, to burn so brightly that even your shadows become sacred. And from those flames rise, not as a wife, not as a husband, not as anyone's possession or project, but as the wild, sovereign, soul-lit self you were always meant to be, unmasked, unchained, unapologetically whole. And now there's nothing left to hold on to. No more excuses. No more hoping they'll change. No more clinging to the fantasy that if you just endure a little longer, happiness will find its way back. Because happiness is not something you wait for. It's something you reclaim, something you choose, something you defend with your voice, with your courage, with the decision to never again betray your soul for the comfort of silence. Look in the mirror deep, direct, without flinching, and ask, am I alive, or am I just existing to preserve a hollow image? Do I still love, or am I just afraid of letting go of a shared past? Am I still myself, or have I become the final role society finds acceptable? And if the answer hurts, that's the signal. The signal that the prison door is open. No one is holding you captive, except the quiet compromise you've been repeating every single day. But now you're awake. Now, you see, and once the soul sees the truth, it cannot unsee. It can only move forward, out of the long night, out of the curtain of false acceptance, to live once and fully as yourself. The woman who needs no one to keep her, the man who no longer has to fake strength to survive. We were not born to endure each other. We were born to awaken each other. And if they cannot walk with you in your becomings, then it was never love. It was delay dressed in affection. So burn the mask you've worn for too long. Don't wait for them to understand. Don't wait for society to approve. You don't need anyone's permission to be free. You just need to choose. Choose yourself. Choose your soul. Choose the truth even if it shakes the foundation of everything you once called home. Because in the end, the only thing worse than losing someone is losing yourself in silence. And you were not born to be silent. You were born to live, to love, to burn, like the untamed flame that was never meant to be domesticated by fear. Let them say what they will. Let them call you selfish. Let them misunderstand. But you must understand this. Freedom is not abandonment. It is return. And you have returned. At last.